Hello, and welcome to Calming the Chaos podcast, where we talk with people around the world who can help you find peace in a chaotic world. I'm your host, Tracy Canella, licensed mental health counselor, certified eating disorder specialist, and advanced clinical hypnotherapist. Calming the Chaos podcast is for those who want self-help resources and education. It's not a substitute for counseling or psychotherapy. So if you like what you hear, please subscribe and share it with your friends. Thanks so much for listening. And now, let the chaos begin. In this episode of Calming the Chaos, I'm here with Michael Scholtes, and we're going to be talking about a topic that is sometimes not talked about, which is depression, and how there can be shame attached to it, especially if you are in a public position of leadership. Now, Michael Scholtes is an ordained minister, and he is in Pennsylvania, and he's going to be joining us to share with us some of his struggles with depression. And he's very open about it, and we're just going to have a conversation about depression and the stigma that goes around it. Now, this is the darker time of the year, so a lot more people are struggling with depression, and I think it will be very helpful to bring him right on up here. So welcome, Michael Scholtes, to Calming the Chaos.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here today.
Yeah, so am I. I think it's a really good topic that we're talking about, and hopefully can help out a lot of people. So let me hear a little bit about yourself. If you were going to do one of those elevator speeches or something to give the viewers and listeners an idea of who you are and how you got to be doing the work that you do right now.
Sure. I grew up in the house with a pastor for a father and an organist for a mother. So faith was just kind of part of the air that I breathed growing up. Grew up my father's the pastor of a Lutheran church, and I grew up very active in the church, believing in God, believing in Christ and all that. It was never my intention as a child to follow in my father's footsteps and be a pastor. In fact, I actively did not want to do that. I thought that is the worst thing in the world. When I went to college, I studied math and physics and thought that I would end up teaching one day in one of those fields, and found that wasn't as interesting as I thought, and ended up going to seminary. And in my head, I only went to seminary because I wanted to learn more about God. I wanted to study some theology, and I figured, well, maybe one day I'll start teaching theology instead of physics. And again, it's not quite how it turned out. It was only after a couple years out of seminary that it finally occurred to me that the reason why I wasn't a pastor was because I had deep inside convinced myself I was not good enough to be a pastor, that there was something severely wrong with me and I could never do something like that. And I had to deal with that in at least two ways. One, I needed to kind of accept that pastors aren't, a higher level of person than other people. And the other thing I had to deal with was that I'm not a worse sort of person than other people. And I found the first one to be much easier to tackle, but because, it was at that point in my life that I realized that it was the voice of depression, which I had struggled with since childhood, that was really telling me, you can't be the thing that you're supposed to be, because you're a wreck and you're a failure, and that's all you'll ever be. And once I came to terms with that, I found the path to being ordained was remarkably smooth. And I've been now serving as a pastor for 15 years in two different congregations.
Wow. So you made the shift somehow to go to seminary, not to be a pastor really at first, but to
Right.
learn more about God. And so these two beliefs that you had about both pastors and yourself, they have to do about a quality of the person, the pastor's quality maybe not being so high and yours being very low quality that you perceived of yourself.
Yeah. And that was something that I had wrestled with since childhood. When I was a kid, I was very moody. I would overreact to things and have, what I guess my family would call fits from time to time, and just start yelling and or run into my room and start crying or something like that. Um, and as I became a teenager, um, I started to really notice how much I hated myself. And I kind of thought everybody felt that way. And I guess there's some of that in all of us, um, but for me, it became so strong that other people were noticing it. I distinctly remember being at at an awards ceremony in ninth grade, and I was always one of the smart kids in school. I always won a lot of the academic awards. But in my seat that night, as I was hearing these awards, being read, and my name coming up several times, I heard this almost audible voice inside me screaming, "Fraud, imposter. If they only knew who you really were, they wouldn't do this." And I didn't realize it at the time, but that was really what I would come to learn, or what I would come to know as the dark voice, which is what I call the self-talk that I have inside me, that still to this day tells me how useless and worthless and what a failure I am. And that's been one of the primary ways I've experienced depression in my life, is as this nasty, self-destructive voice.
Mm. Yeah, the dark voices of depression is what this episode is actually called. And when you realized it, you were only a teenager, it sounds like.
Yeah, I at that point, I don't think I realized that I had, a mental illness. It was, sometimes I describe it as, I don't have voices that I get confused whether there's someone else or not, like someone, with schizophrenia or some other illness might have. My voices are such that I get confused whether they're really me or not. And I think
Mm,
at that age, I really just thought these things are true. This is, these are the moments when I'm seeing myself for who I am, and
mm.
and I need to, to kind of hold on to this and make sure that I don't hurt anybody else, because I felt like everything I did, everything I said was hurting people.
Okay, wow. And yeah, at such a young age, being highly sensitive is the way I
Mm.
would put it, or having a lot of energy. And if you have the parents who are going to be able to handle that or take you to counseling or something like that, then sometimes those things can be worked through. If that isn't happening, then maybe these beliefs will start to form about yourself over time and just get worse and worse. So then you realized that this was depression. Well, you didn't realize that this was depression at first, and I don't know when you realized that this was actually a thing, and it's depression.
Well, the really the first time that it hit me, in a big way, was the time I was hospitalized, when I was a college freshman. I had attempted suicide because I was convinced that this was the right thing to do. I was convinced that I was hurting people so much, and that, even though my death would cause some pain for those around me, I really believed that it would save them from more pain in the future. And I thought I was doing the 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 brave thing, the honorable thing, to rid the world of my presence. And I did. I got, I walked off. I was in college at the time, and I went off campus and found a tree in a park, and climbed it, and was ready to hang myself in that tree. And and I was even praying for courage to do this. I really thought that, maybe God wants me to do this, but even if God doesn't want this, God understands why it's necessary, was kind of the thought process I had. So I
Mm.
I prayed for courage and strength to go through with this. And what happened while I was standing in that tree with the noose around my neck, suddenly I saw this bright light in the distance, And I think that on one level, it was just somebody turning on their garage light or something like that. But on another level, it was the Star of Bethlehem. It was it was a sign from God telling me, no, don't do this. I love you, and we're going to get through this. So I climbed back down and crawled back to my dorm room and went to bed and didn't tell anybody about it. I figured, well, I guess this is over now. Until about 3 days later, I was feeling physically sick. I was feeling like I had a really nasty cold or flu or something. So I went to the student health center at college, and I had heard that mono was going around. I don't know if that was true or not, but I wanted to get checked out. And the nurse there said that there doesn't seem to be anything wrong. Have you been under any stress lately? And being the really sophisticated student that I was, I actually said, well, I did try to kill myself 3 days ago. At which point, the next 2 weeks of my life changed, because I was not allowed to leave that building until I had met with the counselor there. And then when my parents came down to pick me up, and I wasn't going to be allowed back on campus until I had a doctor's note saying that I was no longer a danger to myself or others. And long story short, I ended up in a hospital, a psychiatric hospital, for 11 days. And it was while I was there that I finally realized this is real. This is something, and this is treatable.
Wow.
The two things that really struck me most in the hospital, and I must say I had a really positive experience there. I know some people have horror stories about being in a psychiatric hospital, but I found it to be a really positive time once I got over the first few days of anger at being locked up. But the two things that really struck me there was one, the other patients there seemed so normal. They seemed like just regular people who were dealing with a crisis that they couldn't cope with, which meant maybe that's what I was too. Maybe I was just a normal person who was dealing with a crisis that I needed help to cope with. And the other thing was, these were the days before cell phones, but my father had given me his credit card and said, just use the payphone and make calls to anybody you need to at any time. Just doesn't matter how much money it is, because long distance was not free back then. And I spoke to so many of my friends from college, from high school, from other places, and they were all so brokenhearted about hearing this. There was one friend of mine who refused to talk to me for a few months because she was so angry at me for this. Which eventually, when we kind of made up, I realized because she cared for me so much,
Mhm.
and that was kind of the first step towards realizing that that maybe the inner voice I have is not always speaking the truth, and maybe there's ways I can find to deal with this in a way that doesn't lead to destruction like this.
Well, so did you at that point in time, it sounds like that you were talking to people and maybe you had gotten maybe some other beliefs in your mind about yourself. Other people obviously really cared about you. Could you actually start to care about yourself and think differently about yourself?
Yeah, I started to. In fact, I mean, I was 18 at the time, and I once I got out of the hospital, I felt like, well, I'm cured now. I realized what the problem was, and now I dealt with it, and now everything's going to be fine. Um, I just needed to remember, that other people cared about me, and and the other interesting thing is that actually, my faith grew through this. I started reading scripture more, and found a passage in Paul's letter to the Romans where he says that absolutely nothing can separate us from the love of God, not life, not death, not angels or demons, or anything in all creation can separate us from God's love. And And that's what I felt at that time, was that God's love was so strong that even my own um, self-destructive actions and thoughts weren't even sufficient to keep God away. So I started to see that there were other voices I could listen to, and after that, I kind of felt as though I had two voices talking to me at any time, kind of like the cartoon cliche of the angel and the devil on the shoulders. That I had my inner dark voice of depression telling me these terrible things, but I had God's voice, kind of whispering and saying, "But I love you, and I always have, and I have a job for you, and you can do it." And of course, the story I told before about when I realized that I could be a pastor took place, 10 years after that. So it was not over. It's an ongoing issue, but yeah, I think learning to hear other voices and give them some weight is really helpful.
Right. And what did you actually ever talk to anybody when you were even a little child about any of your thoughts or feelings when you noticed that you started to hate yourself? Did you ever tell anybody that?
Not really, not directly. It would come out. I had a couple of serious girlfriends in high school. I say serious, they lasted for 6 months or whatever, which for me in high school was pretty serious. Um, and there was something that I always did that I ended up kind of calling the Mike treatment, which is there would be a time when I would be sitting with my girlfriend, and we'd be talking about whatever, and then I would say, "I don't know why you care about me. I don't know why you love me. I don't know why you're with me. I'm just worthless. I'm just gonna hurt you." And she would respond, "No, no, no, you're great. I love you. This and
Mm.
this," and it would turn into a real argument. And I was really good at arguing the point that I was useless and was hurting them and was not good for them. And usually what would happen is it would eventually get to the point where she would start crying, and then I would suddenly realize what I had done and say, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But look what I did. See, I was right." And it would just be this very uncomfortable, painful thing. So I think that's how I talked about it, unfortunately, as
Mm.
a teenager, is I didn't know how to talk about it openly, so it came out in other ways.
Yeah, it just came out, right? About this thing, and that you would be better off, girlfriend, without me
Hmm.
because I am this awfully flawed person and you're better off without me. And then it became an argument where you're trying to argue this case. And then the self-fulfilling prophecy comes up, right? Because
Yeah.
then it actually happens and I did the thing. And then now see I'm this awful person, just like I said.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And
So
and and it's
often.
it's thoughts like that that really led to the suicidal ideation as well. It just kind of was broader, that it's not just that I'm bad for you, it's I'm bad for this whole world.
Mhm. Yeah. Wow. Well, to get beyond those beliefs, you've got to do some reprogramming of the brain. And the first thing that you said was that you started to listen to other possibilities, other voices, and other voices that were positive, one from God, from the Bible, or from the Apostle Paul, who is telling you that nothing can separate you from the love of God, and your friends when you were locked up in the mental hospital, and they were also telling you that they cared about you, some with anger, right? I
Yeah.
care about you so much, I'm angry at you trying to take yourself away from this world.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I actually neglected to talk about the fact that you have written a book, and so you obviously wrote the book recently. It came out, right?
Mhm.
And
Yes.
but you were writing it from the perspective of a pastor, and so you became a pastor. What, at age 28, or you started going to seminary at about age 28. You said that it was about 10 years after you were
Yeah.
in the psych ward. Yeah. Okay. So something must have happened in that 10 years. How did you come out of the psych ward and start living your life again with the possibilities of these new voices and maybe new things I can believe about myself?
Well, I think in my 20s, I was at least through part of my 20s, I was still in something of a denial about it. I like, I thought I had been cured. I thought I had solved it, and I was really surprised when I started feeling these things again from time to time. Um, but eventually, I was probably in my late 20s when I finally decided I need to seek some professional help for this, some ongoing professional help, and I started seeing a counselor. And I've had several um, long-term counselors since then, but I've basically been in counseling not nonstop for the most part, since my mid 20s, and that has been incredibly helpful because it's, if nothing else, it's somebody who can ask the right questions and who can act as a really good mirror to the things I'm thinking and saying. One thing
Mhm.
I've found is that the more I isolate, the more I keep my feelings and thoughts inside, the more dangerous they get. I sometimes there's magic in just saying the words, "I'm feeling horrible today,"
Mhm.
because then it kind of gets it out, and you realize it's not as complicated and as universe altering as you think it is, as I think it is inside.
Mhm.
Um, so there's, I think having that ongoing relationship with a counselor who can understand and who can listen and reflect well has been really helpful to me. Um, I've got a wife now who is very loving and very, she doesn't fully understand what it's like inside the nightmare of my head sometimes, but she believes me, and she encourages me, and sometimes kind of forces me to share and talk, and that's what I need sometimes.
Yeah, then it doesn't stay inside, and then
Mhm.
you're alone with your thoughts, walking through all of this darkness by yourself. And so you have your wife, and you've had counselors, and you do say it out loud now. It sounds like just
Oh, yeah.
naming the feeling. And I think you had said when we talked before, embracing that brokenness, embracing the feeling that comes along.
Yeah, and there's, and since working in the church, being a full-time pastor, it's odd that I'm as open about this as I am. I don't think it's rare for pastors to have depression. I think something about the makeup of someone who would be called to a ministry like this is, can also have those proclivities too. But I think it is uncommon for a pastor to be talking about it openly in his congregation the way I do. And I have found that that also has been incredibly healing for me and for my congregation. I
Mhm.
decided at the current congregation I'm at right now, I decided to kind of come open about it within my first year there. I kind of felt like, you know what, I don't want to hide this here, and I just want to find out if they're going to accept me or not like this. And if they won't, then I'd just rather move on now.
Mm.
And so in a sermon, on a Sunday morning before 150 people, I I forget what the topic of the sermon was, but somehow or another it was about, we've all got things we struggle with. One of the things I struggle with is something called depression, and I explained what depression was and how I experienced it, and what that was like. And then I said, and I invite you, if you're comfortable to do so, to right now say the name of what it is you struggle with. And I expected to hear maybe two or three things. I expected to hear some coughs and some crickets, um, but I didn't. It was amazing. I heard at least 24 people call things out. Things
Wow.
like cancer, things like struggles with my grandkids, and at least 3 or 4 people also said depression. And kind of since then, it has been okay to talk about that in this church. I think people come to me saying, "I'm going through something right now, and I don't know what it is, and I need some help." And sometimes I talk with them a little about it, and sometimes I just kind of give them some resources and say, this is where I go to counseling. Call them; they're really good. Um, and I think more people are open about their own struggles with mental health than they would have been if I hadn't, been open about that.
Great.
So it's again, it's just kind of getting it out of being inside, and it's so healing, or it can be, but it's also risky. There was another congregation I served where I came out about it, and excuse me, and I didn't really receive much affirmation at all. It wasn't Nobody told me you shouldn't have said that or anything, but it was awkward, and it
Mm.
was clear that they weren't ready to embrace that.
What did
But
you
that's
do? What did you do with that, right? Can you embrace that? Can you embrace the crickets?
It was hard. It was hard. And I it was only about a year later that I left that congregation, and in retrospect, I didn't think that was the reason at the time, but in retrospect, that was probably part of it. At least inside, is I felt like I opened myself up, and I didn't receive what I was hoping for, and I need another place where I can get that.
Yeah. Well, so you honored yourself and you were able to say, well, this is who I am, right? And if they are not able to accept me, then I will move on. I think you'd said that earlier in the interview too.
Yeah.
And so you had come a long way by that time, I think. Can you tell our audience any special things that you have done along the path? Counseling is one, embracing and talking about it is another thing that you have done to deal with depression. Are there any other things that you think might be useful to the audience? And then we can get into talking about your book a little bit more.
Okay. Yeah, I have I I have kind of a scattershot approach to my mental wellness. I try to do a lot of things, in addition to counseling, and being open about it. I am taking antidepressant medication, which I think is helpful. It's really hard to know for sure, but I think it is helpful. Um, I have a spiritual director who, I talk to about faith issues and things like that. And in my life, my faith and my mental health are very intertwined. So those conversations also go in that direction.
Mhm.
Um, I also try to keep myself on an exercise regimen, which is sometimes easier said than done. But when I do, I find it does help some. And for me, writing is very therapeutic.
Mm.
Journaling for myself enables me to get thoughts out and kind of untangle them some, and even more so when I write for other people. When I blog, or even write a sermon or something like that, it enables me to take what's inside and kind of make an art out of it. I think that's been very helpful to me. I'm not a visual artist at all. I can't paint or draw, but I think I'm something of an artist with words, and I think it's helpful to take the darkness inside and do something artistic with it. Um,
Yeah. Well, you hear that about music all the time,
oh
right?
yeah,
People who
yeah,
do music and they'll write a song or they'll just get it out there. And so that's just another way of helping it to leave your body or your mind.
yeah.
The mind is part of the body. And so I don't know if you've ever tried any mind body approaches, like feeling where the depression is in your body and trying to do some of those sorts of approaches.
Yes, yes. One of my counselors was really into that, and
Mhm.
I've done some of that. I didn't mention mindfulness has been really helpful as well. Sometimes really simple mindfulness, but also I've explored meditation and centering prayer and kind of deeper things like that have been really helpful. In my case, I find that that something that really works for me often only works for a time. I kind of need novelty for whatever
Yeah.
reason. So I kind
Switch
of
it up.
cycle through different things, meditation. Um I you mentioned music. I am not a musician, but I can bang out a melody on the piano, and sometimes I just sit at the piano and just play stuff that comes into my head, and it's not anything that anyone would ever pay to listen to, but it gets emotions out of me, which is very helpful.
Yeah, and anybody can play like the bongo drums.
Mhm.
And bongo drumming is really super cool if you get a stand and you're standing up and you're just drumming. And if you have another person to drum with as well, that really is neat to do. If you've never tried that, it's really super cool. And you don't have to be a musician to do
Yeah,
it. You
right.
just have to think of a rhythm or something. And
Yeah,
it gets that energy out the energy, because you know emotions are energy, and getting the energy out of your body just by talking about it, by writing, by banging out something on the piano, bongoing, whatever you do, is releasing that energy in a way that's not destructive. Like, well, some of the times our words can be destructive, like you had
mhm.
mentioned with your girlfriends. You said the mic treatment,
Yeah,
that could be destructive to yourself and the relationship, right? But getting them down on paper or banging out a tune on the piano really does help.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and put your website up here. And this is the blog as well, www.theschultes.com. And we're going to go ahead and share the screen and take a little trip over there. Okay. So can you see that all right?
Yes.
All right. Wait a minute here. There we go. Okay. So let's just have you. Now, I've got on the screen here, I've got your book. Is that right?
Yes.
All right. Tell us a little bit about your book.
Sure. It's called Darkwater, a pastor's memoir of depression and faith. And it actually started as a series of blog posts about maybe 6 years ago or so. Um, I never quite figured out what I wanted to do with my blog. I just put all sorts of different things up there. But one of the things I started writing was a series of posts that I called snapshots of my depression. And I would just, think of a vignette from my past when my depression got really bad and something happened that I thought would be interesting and might people might be able to relate to, and I started sharing them that way. And I noticed after I wrote a few of them that those posts were getting a lot more feedback and traffic than a lot of the other things I was writing. And I thought, well, maybe there's something to this. So I kept writing them. I kept writing them. I kept thinking of more events from my past that really were might be interesting, and might show something about how depression and faith work together in my life. And then after I got to about 20, I thought, you know what, maybe I could even write a book out of this. So I started playing around with how these blog posts could be expanded into a book. And after some uh after reaching out to a bunch of publishers, I found a publisher interested in the idea, and after a couple runs of some really good editing by the editors there, this book was created, and it is the story of my life from childhood up until a couple years ago, and kind of is very open about what I was going through, what I did. It explains in great detail some of the stories that I shared here a few minutes ago, including my suicide attempt. But I believe it also has throughout it, a deep sense of hope
Mm,
because I got through it, and because I was able to hear those better voices uh, and follow them. And the
mm,
book's called Darkwater, partially because where I've really been able to find the deepest hope is through thinking about my own baptism. That's become really precious to me in the last few years.
mm,
As I'm someone who now baptizes, and I tell people, often infants, but I tell their parents anyway, that this is God's promise for you, that God will always be with you through everything, and that God will always have a plan for you, and that God will never ever let you go. That's what this means.
mm,
And I've started to really hear that, and embrace that, just like that quote from Romans I mentioned earlier, that
mm.
you know the the promise of baptism is that God is always with me, and the water's dark not because it's dirty and messy, which is what I have often thought about myself, but it's dark because it runs so deep, and you can never see the bottom of it because God's love is so vast.
Wow. Wow. So a baptismal sort of the symbolism there in the title of your book.
Hmm.
Darkwater, a pastor's memoir of depression and faith. So there's some light there coming through the water. And sometimes a light can be just another person to talk to, or that reaching out, or even somebody turning on their garage light and preventing
Yes.
you from hanging yourself, right? Uh, that's got to be that's got to be a really good, profound read. And so it's available on Amazon and at Barnes and Noble. I also noticed that you have up here a newsletter called Biblia Luna. You want to say a little bit about that?
Sure. This is something I started a few months ago. Biblia Luna is kind of fake Latin for what it means. Biblia is to represent the Bible, and Luna meaning the moon, but also from the word Luna, comes the idea of lunacy. So the idea of Biblia Luna is it's the intersection of faith and mental health. And I send this out every week. One of the things I do in it is I'm hoping it's a resource for other people who preach, because I look at the upcoming readings in the lectionary that Lutherans and other mainline denominations use, and I find something in the readings that has to do with mental health. And it also can be just kind of an interesting read for anybody who is interested in that. I also each week share some helpful resources that I'm aware of, from websites to podcasts to books, as well as certain types of therapy that I've learned about, and just share an update on what's going on with the book and my marketing of the book. So it's available weekly. You can sign up for it right at the website there.
Great, great. So this is a resource that you could use, and it is out every week. Outstanding. Well, I'm going to go ahead and put the website again. It is theschultes.com. And I'm going to go ahead and take us to your blog because I think this is where all of this started. Okay. So I'm
Hmm.
going to share the screen again. So this is your main page of your website. Again, it's theschultes.com. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about your blog and how you actually got started blogging?
Um, that's, I think I started blogging about 10 years ago, I guess, and I think it was just I have always kind of thought of myself as a writer and wanted to kind of have the opportunity to write things that and share them with other people that they might find interesting. And like I said, the blog has often been kind of scattershot. I can see what you're scrolling through there is I do put a lot of my sermons up
Mhm.
for people to read. I also have written some essays about various things about something political that I feel strongly about. I'd put up there. I had a series a few years ago where I just reflected on a different number every day. I started with the number one on January 1st and wrote some long essay about what the word number one means symbolically, and then it went to two and three. And once I was in the 60s, I kind of petered out on that. But that they're still there if you look through the archives. Um, and it's it's just, I think a lot of what the blog is for me is it's also um a kind of therapy. It's a way for me to get what's inside out. And again, I've found that people respond to it, and a lot of people really enjoy reading what I write and tell me that the reason they do is because it's so honest. I'm seeing something else. Another thing that I find very helpful, I should have mentioned earlier, is walking labyrinths. And I
This
have a
is
l
so cool.
I have a whole series of whenever I walk a new labyrinth, I blog about it. And I'm seeing now that I've walked 68 different labyrinths. Uh, if your listeners don't know, a labyrinth is a spiritual tool that's on the ground and is often outside, although some of them can be inside as well. And it's basically a long circular twisty path that you walk. It kind of looks like a maze, but it's not a maze because there's no choices to make. You just follow the one path in and then follow it back out again. And people have been using this as a spiritual tool for centuries. And ever since I started walking labyrinths, I find them to be incredibly powerful for me. I experience a kind of a moment with God every time I do it. And again, I blog all about them on here, and not only about the labyrinth itself, but about what I wrestled with during that. So
It's so interesting that you described the difference between a maze and a labyrinth. I always thought they were the same thing, and I've used the word labyrinth to describe, like, when I put my feet on the ground every day, it's gonna be a new labyrinth. It's gonna
mm.
be walking in a different direction, but the way you're saying is there's one way in and one way out, and it's the process that really matters in a labyrinth. So what I'm thinking about is a more of a maze. Like every day is different and you're walking through your life and it can take a twist or it can take a turn at any point. And so I'm so glad that you explained to me the difference between the two because now I'll just start saying maze.
Well, I mean, I think the word has a couple meanings, but in terms of the spiritual tool, yeah, it's one way in and one way out.
Mm, wow. This is neat. So what the picture we're looking at here was number 68 and it looks a fairly how long do you think it takes to get through that or do you remember?
That one, that's a fairly small one. I walk it slowly, and I usually pause in the center for a time. So all told, to walk in, pause, and come out, probably about 10-15 minutes.
Okay. Yeah.
Some of the bigger ones can be more like half an hour.
Wow. So, yes, check out Michael's blog. Here it looks like a little larger one right here.
Mhm, mhm.
And it actually has stones and bricks. It's sort of a more rustic looking labyrinth. Who would have thunk it? Oh my goodness. Wow. So I'm not going to show any more of these labyrinths because I'll just get down the labyrinth a rabbit hole. But do check out Michael's website and his blog. You also have a Facebook page.
Mhm.
And so is that a group or just some things that you post on Facebook?
That's a page, and most of what that page is my blog posts when they get posted, as well as my Biblia Luna issues. When they get posted, they get cross posted to Facebook. I don't do a whole lot of stuff on Facebook apart from sharing that.
Okay, but there's the Facebook page.
Mhm.
We've also got you are on Twitter. Are you a tweeter?
I am
To
not,
the
to be
pastor who's
honest.
a tweeter.
I don't even have Twitter on my phone. Like my blog is linked to that, and every time I post an entry, it automatically goes to Twitter because I heard that was a good thing. But
Yeah, they
I don't use Twitter in any other way.
I know, I'm not
And
really a
right now,
tweeter
it's
either.
who knows whether I should or not right now. So
Yeah, who knows? So then we also have your book is available on Amazon and Barnes and
Mhm.
Noble. And then I have this link as well. So that's the first page we went to where we looked at the book. So that can be accessed right from the website at
Yeah,
theschultes.com. Great.
great.
Well, yeah, I really appreciate you coming out here and just being really honest and candid. Pastors can have depression. Uh, Counselors can have depression. We most definitely do. People in leadership can. We're only human. And I think that one of the big takeaways is there's that dark voice, but there's always another sort of voice that you can access, tune into, and listen to.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you for joining us here on Calming the Chaos podcast, and have a wonderful day.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Calming the Chaos podcast. If the information in this podcast has been helpful, please consider subscribing and share it with your friends. You can find this podcast on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Music, Spotify, and on YouTube. You can also go to our podcast website at www.calmingthechaospodcast.com, where you can listen to all Calming the Chaos podcasts. Thanks so much for listening, and I look forward to sharing my next podcast episode with you. In the meantime, take care.